What's going on, Notre Dame fans? Happy Tuesday night. This has become a customary Tuesday night video at Blue and Gold with the college football playoff rankings coming out. And Eric Hansen, Jack Sobel, I know you guys were watching and you have some of these teams and where they're ranked in your heads right now. I just want to start out by saying not too entirely surprised with Notre Dame's ranking at number 9. Because, Eric, that's exactly where the Fighting Irish came in the Associated Press poll, which you have a hand in that, and then the coaches poll as well. So Oklahoma jumps Notre Dame, but Alabama falls behind, and that seemed to be pretty expected.
Yeah, that was pretty expected, and the bracket looks pretty much like we thought it would. I think it's going to be really interesting in the coming weeks what happens with the teams in front of Notre Dame, because I think the 9 spot is probably from 7, 8, 9, 10 is the worst spot of those. You have to play on the road, and then you would have to play the number 1 seed, presumably Ohio State, in the second round. I think you're better off being at 10, but I think in the middle of November, you want to be at 9. You want a little wiggle room because you don't want to be on the bubble on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Eric said. The bubble meaning that if you're at number 10 on Selection Sunday and then Texas Tech loses in the Big 12 title game, then all of a sudden the committee has a decision to make, and you don't want to be in that spot at that time, but you would also rather be at number 10 than number 9, because that's the worst of both worlds. You have to both go on the road and play. And we should note that assumes Ohio State beats Indiana in the Big 10 title game, which we think will happen, but is not a guarantee. So, yeah, number 9 for now, number 10 on the day.
Yeah, and this gets to the word that I think you heard Reese Davis say a couple times tonight. And when you get closer to that final rankings, you're talking about ceilings, right? And I think Notre Dame maybe has a ceiling of number 8 and maybe could host a college football playoff game in that first round, but that's about it. And like, you've seen the fluctuation between 10 and 9 for Notre Dame. You haven't seen them ascend to number 8 yet. So Jack, I mean, I know you're always looking at these things. How does Notre Dame get to number 8? And how could you see a flip there on what you're seeing in the bracket there and say, okay, yep. Because I think that's what a lot of Notre Dame fans are wishing for right now is, all right, avoid that number 1 seed if you can. But if you can't, if you are locked into that 8-9 game, you really want to be the 8. Does Notre Dame have a shot at that still?
They do if Oklahoma loses again, or if Oregon loses to USC. I think that could very much bring the Irish ahead of the Ducks, because that would mean Notre Dame is a comparative win. Oklahoma losing again would give the Sooners their 3rd loss. Notre Dame would jump back ahead of them. I don't think Oklahoma is going to lose either their final 2 games against Missouri and LSU, but it's the SEC. Anything can happen in any given week. They could move up to number 8 by Texas Tech losing in the Big 10 championship game and then Big 12 championship game and then being left out. Maybe Ole Miss loses the Egg Bowl, which with everything that's swirling around Lane Kiffin. People forget that the last time this stuff happened when Hugh Freeze got hired at Auburn and Lane Kiffin was a name to watch there. Ole Miss really struggled down the stretch, so that's something to watch out for there. So there are ways, but it involves the teams ahead of them messing up. It's not in Notre Dame's control.
Eric, you sort of got to that at the beginning of this show, that you're very interested in seeing what happens with the teams ahead of Notre Dame. So we'll flip back to the actual rankings here. What do you kind of forecast? I mean, it's like Ohio State's projected to win that Big 10, probably going to beat Indiana in that game and remain at number 1. But with a loss, where does Indiana go? Texas A&M, if they're undefeated, do they rise to number 2? Just kind of how are you seeing the 7 or 8 teams that are ahead of Notre Dame? What's the forecast for those teams the rest of the way?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen enough crazy things happen in college football this year that I'm not sure we're done with them. I don't know that Notre Dame is playing a strong enough competition the last 2 games to get involved with that nutso stuff. But let's say Ohio State and Michigan turns out crazy. I don't think there's any chance IU loses to Purdue. Texas A&M could lose to Texas. If they did, how far would Texas A&M fall? Does that head-to-head, does that botched hold on an extra point cost, Notre Dame a spot there? Georgia, I mean, they could lose in the SEC championship game, and maybe Georgia Tech could give them a game. I mean, Haynes King covers up for a lot of ugliness around that Georgia Tech team, but I don't think he can lift them against Georgia this year. The Texas Tech thing is interesting to me because Baron Morton is so good, and they are so screwed if he gets hurt because they've lost their backup quarterback. They played Mitch Griffiths in their last game, half the game, just to rest Baron Morton. He was at Wake Forest, and he sat out last year because he didn't like his transfer portal options. But, I mean, if he had to play, the committee would look at Texas Tech a lot differently. Let's say if Baron Morton got hurt in the Big 12 championship game. And then Jack kind of ran through the teams just ahead of Notre Dame. I mean, I think Oklahoma, I think their defense is elite, and I think their offense is really scary if you're an Oklahoma fan, because I think LSU and Missouri could at least make them uncomfortable. I don't know that those two teams could score much on Oklahoma, but they could hold Oklahoma's offense down. And you mentioned Oregon and USC. I think the game up at Seattle against Washington could be a little ticklish for Oregon as well, but really interesting stuff. But again, Notre Dame just has to take care of business, and they should be happy to be in the field because I think they're capable of beating some of the teams ahead of them.
Yeah, I think if we're going to talk about some of these games remaining real quickly, the Big 12 championship game is trending to be Texas Tech and BYU. I guess I'll flip back over here to the rankings real quick just so you guys can visualize that. What if BYU gets its lick back on Texas Tech and beats the Red Raiders? Where does BYU jump to? Where does Texas Tech fall to? That creates a little bit of confusion in the, like Greg McElroy said at the beginning of the show tonight, he's most interested in 7 through 10. Who's getting that home game? Who's avoiding the number 1 seed? All of those different things. If BYU has a rematch with Texas Tech and beats the Red Raiders, then that creates confusion right there. USC beating Oregon. Somebody's got to move back. USC's got to move forward. So there are some very interesting games. And to your point on that, Eric, it's like the chaos of college football is far from finished in this season. And Notre Dame is just kind of in the middle of it, right? Notre Dame can only do so much by beating Syracuse and Stanford.
And that home game for Notre Dame, I mean, let's say one of those teams loses in front of them, and you just slide Notre Dame and Alabama up to that 8-9 game. That home field advantage in the crappy weather we have here in South Bend against Alabama would be huge.
I know I didn't play a lot into that last year, Jack, because Indiana was coming up here, and I'm just not like the big weather game guy anyway. But yeah, home field advantage. Look, if you're not going to avoid Ohio State, like I've been saying, if you're going to be matched up in that 8-9 with the one waiting for you, and that's probably going to be Ohio State, then you want to play that 8-9 game at home. There's just no other way to look at it than that.
Yeah, I remember seeing a Rams team that went to the Super Bowl play a November game in Chicago, and that did not turn out well for them. So the weather advantage is real when you're playing a team from the SEC, right? Indiana didn't really matter. Notre Dame wasn't losing that game if it played its best, regardless. What I'm interested in when we talk about like other teams in conference championships, like if A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama, none of them slip up, then who wins that 3-way tie of Georgia, Ole Miss, and Bama at 7-1? If it's Bama, that could be a concern for Notre Dame, because what if Bama wins that game over Texas A&M and then jumps the Irish? Then who knows what happens, especially if Texas Tech loses that game. If Texas Tech wins the Big 12, Notre Dame is in no questions asked. I think that's a big takeaway from this. But I'm curious, like, what could happen if Bama could potentially have a chance to jump them. The TV show is really playing up the possibility of the committee reconsidering Miami and Notre Dame, which I don't think would happen, but Eric definitely doesn't think is going to happen, so I'll give him the floor.
That just seems odd that it doesn't matter every week until right at the end. You know, Miami and Pittsburgh will be, or Miami will be, have a common opponent with Pittsburgh here coming up. But I'm not sure that Miami could beat them any more impressively than Notre Dame beat them on the road. So it just doesn't seem like there's enough gas in the tank for Miami to get into that argument. If the head-to-head isn't all encompassing now, then why would it be then? And again, even before, when people were complaining about it, Louisville beat Miami, and they did, until this week, they had the same record, and Louisville wasn't ahead of Miami. Virginia beat Louisville. So if you're going to go head-to-head as everything, then Virginia, Louisville, Miami, and Notre Dame should have been slotted in that order. And there's no way Virginia is that kind of team that should be in the top 10.
I think their case, at least on TV, their case was in Miami has looked a lot better since the first rankings came out.
I do think they've looked better.
Yeah, that is true. But they also ignore that, like, hey, Notre Dame just won by 39 against obviously Navy, but they still won by 39. And Navy's better than Syracuse, by the way, who Miami beat by 28. And then they went on the road to Pittsburgh and won a game by 22. And they have a similarly good win over NC State. So, like, there's a lot of talk about, Miami's looked better. Not a lot of talk about how good Notre Dame has looked since those rankings came out. And bear in mind, the rankings came out coming off that slog against Boston College. So whatever concerns the committee might have had over that, Notre Dame has quashed since then. So it would take, for the committee to reconsider its evaluation of Notre Dame and Miami, it would take Notre Dame looking bad, even in wins against Syracuse and Stanford. Which, if that happens, then that is a perfectly fair conversation to have.
Right. Absolutely.
But for now, I don't think there was any way Miami would have moved over Notre Dame tonight.
I think what we've seen with Miami in the last couple of rankings compared to what we saw in the first one with the Hurricanes coming in at number 18 is not so much a overcorrection of where the Hurricanes stand in relation to Notre Dame, who they beat, but more so, okay, we might have got it a little bit wrong just looking at Miami. Like maybe they should have been a top 15 team all along, and that's where they've trended them up to. But it has way less to do with, oh man, we heard the noise about the head-to-head with Notre Dame, and now we have to move Miami up. So they might have had it wrong from the beginning, and then like you said, Jack, Miami has played better. But also, like you said, Jack, Notre Dame is doing the exact same thing as Miami right now, which is beating the crap out of opponents. You look at what Miami did against NC State, 41-7. What did Notre Dame do against NC State? Wasn't it like 36-7? It was basically the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Notre Dame has a chance to do basically the same thing against Syracuse that Miami did a couple of weeks ago, 38-10. I think for all of our money, Notre Dame at home will probably win by more than that. So if you think that Miami was behind Notre Dame on November whatever when the first rankings came out, nothing should have changed in your mind to say, oh, yeah, now Miami should be ahead of Notre Dame. It's not what it is. And I'll go to a Joe Tessitore comment that I think might play into this, and I'm interested to hear y'all's thoughts on it. He just covered and called the Notre Dame Pitt game, and he goes on Get Up this week, ESPN's morning show, and he says Notre Dame is getting better every single week. The Irish have the best player in America in Jeremiah Love. I think all this is stuff that the committee takes into account via the eye test or whatever you want to call it, that, hey, this Notre Dame team is legit top 10 team in the country, and we have to keep ranking it as so, and that's that.
When you just look at their metrics, which I do every week, I do a stat matrix of Notre Dame and all its opponents every week, and I went back and looked at where they ranked after the Purdue game, which is when Marcus had the uncomfortable coaching staff meeting. And I mean, they've gone up like 90 spots at least in every defensive category since that point. And for Notre Dame, especially having just played Navy, to be 13th, for example, in run defense is stunning. But they're up in and out into the top 20 in pass efficiency defense. They were in the hundreds. I mean, there's so many things and it doesn't mean that Miami game shouldn't count, but I'll give you an example. I mean, the margin of victory matters, how teams evolve from that point. There was a year where Notre Dame did have a ceiling, and it was 2019, and they deserved that ceiling because they got their butts handed to them at Michigan after a bye week. And it was so one-sided, and Michigan didn't necessarily play well after that point, but Notre Dame couldn't jump over them. It was just, I know in my mind, they couldn't jump over them, even though I felt like Notre Dame was the better team. That was so one-sided, and it was deep enough into the season where you couldn't say, well, they were putting their team together. With Miami, I'm pretty convinced Notre Dame would win that game. I do think Miami's the best team in the ACC. I just don't know that they're playoff worthy, having lost to two unranked teams.
And of course, Miami being the best team in the ACC, they have no one to blame but themselves for the fact that they're probably not going to win the ACC because they lost twice to teams they shouldn't, and now they're probably not going to make the conference championship game. So, Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing is the head-to-head matters. Eric said it. I think Jack believes it. I believe it. But the head-to-head was in week 1. And what have you done since then? Miami has lost to 2 3-loss ACC teams. And that's just kind of unacceptable if you are the cream of the crop of that conference. We'll spot you 1 loss, but you did it again. You lost to Louisville and you lost to SMU. Who has Notre Dame lost to? A top 3 team in the country that has lost to nobody, and this Miami team that everybody is trying to prop up for a playoff spot, which clearly that's a good team. Now, is it going to miss out on the playoff perhaps? Yeah, but that happens. And to your point, Jack, it's happening because those 2 losses, Miami's 2 losses, are way worse than Notre Dame's 2 losses. And I think that has to be looked at. It's just what it is.
And again, like going back to my point from earlier, if Notre Dame looks way worse than Miami over these next 2 weeks, then the evaluation starts to be closer, and then you can take a look, and maybe the head-to-head does come into play when you're evaluating those 2 teams together. Right. But we're not at that point yet.
And we're not at that point yet, Eric, because Notre Dame keeps looking really, really good. It goes back to the Joe Tessitore thing. Like, you can't penalize this Notre Dame team for beating Miami by 39 and beating Pitt. Like, College Game Tape.
Beating Navy by 39, Tyler.
Navy, I'm sorry. Who did I say?
Miami.
Navy. Notre Dame wishes it beat Miami by 39. But College Game Day went to Pitt thinking it was going to be a good game, hoping. I think hoping is probably the operative word.
They were hoping it was going to be a must win.
Yeah. Turned out Pat Narduzzi stood by his word and kind of spotted Notre Dame 14 points off the bat. But, like, again, Notre Dame doesn't control what the opposition does. Excuse me. Notre Dame controls what it does. And right now, it is very much 2 wins away from a college football playoff spot again.
Right. What I think frustrates people sometimes is they want rules that they could say, okay, if A happens, here's what's going to happen in the rankings. And the thing is, these situations don't match up. There aren't hard and fast rules. There are principles, bracket principles and ranking principles, but they don't always align and they don't always match up. And that's where people get frustrated. And I know one of the myths is that that's still out there is that these conference championship games don't matter. And the Athletic did a really good piece that went back and talked to some committee members from last year. And within that SMU Clemson game, SMU was out at halftime. Alabama was in, SMU was out. Now, SMU made it a game in the second half, and SMU got in. But had they got blown out by Clemson, they were out of the field.
You know who is a big example of conference championship games not mattering? Or maybe, like, how can we be just good enough to not make one and still get into the college football playoff? It's Oklahoma. Like, Oklahoma just needs to beat 2 unranked teams the rest of the way. Not going to make it into the SEC championship game, most likely, because we talk about all those 1-loss teams in the SEC, and then you have Texas A&M, no loss. Oklahoma's going to be just fine with going 10-2 and punching a ticket to the college football playoff without having to play a conference championship game. Kind of sounds like Notre Dame, but they're actually in a conference. So it's funny the way that works out, and you can't script that. Like, there's no way that Brent Venables could have said, this is how I want our season to go. I want us to go 10-2, not play in the SEC championship game, but still go to the playoff. And for that matter, Ryan Day couldn't have done it last year after losing to Michigan, but it happens for him. So it's just one of those funny quirks that sometimes you don't have to play in that conference championship game and it can work out in your favor.
And the way that conferences are so random in terms of who you're playing on your conference schedule, there are years that you have a really easier path to maybe getting into that conference championship game. And there's some teams, I mean, Georgia has played a lot of really good teams this year. They've had a harder road. There's some teams that haven't had as hard a road. I think Texas A&M might be one of them that hasn't had quite the challenge that Georgia has. But I still think Texas A&M is a really good team. And they do, I mean, to their credit, they went to Notre Dame and won that game on the road. That's probably, you know, a really big feather in their cap. Well, it is. It's their best win.
I was thinking about something, kind of changing the subject a little bit. We were talking about the Ohio State thing and how if you're Notre Dame, you'd rather be on the 10 line and avoid them. Is there kind of a case to be made right now, depending on how bad Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate's injuries are, that if you have to play them, you would rather play them earlier than later before those guys have a chance to get healthy? I don't know. You mentioned that with the Ryan Day Michigan thing, and that kind of got me thinking, because like we've been assuming that you want to stay off the 8-9 line because of Ohio State. Is that still true with the status of their receivers, which I don't think are completely known? But
yeah, that's the part of
something I've been thinking about.
That's the part of it. We don't really know what their injury status is, but man, it didn't look good when Jeremiah Smith was walking off the field there the other night. I mean, ask Jaden Greathouse about soft tissue injuries, right? That's not good. And Carnell Tate, same situation. So now take their statuses that we're unsure of out of the equation and just say, like, if they're not playing or if they're not even close to 100%, I think Ohio State is a totally different football team without its two best wide receivers. I think Julian Sayin has been enabled to be who he has been this season because of those two guys. And it's very obvious that you would want to play in Ohio State that doesn't have those two guys close to full health than playing them at full strength. Because at full strength, Eric, they're the best team in the country, and I think you've been ranking them as such ever since they beat Texas in week 1.
Absolutely. I did this last year and I did it again this year. I went through and looked who would be just based on what the team strengths were and weaknesses, who would be the best matchups. And those always surprised me. Last year, I think Tyler James thought I was speaking Portuguese when I said, you know what, Georgia doesn't match up well with Notre Dame going into the playoff.
I said really? This too. That was a great take, Eric.
Thank you. The two teams that really surprised me that Notre Dame matches up very well against are Oklahoma and Alabama. Oklahoma, offensively, there's not a lot that they do well. They don't protect their passer. They're not a good running team. They turn the ball over. Alabama, I was stunned, is the number 121 team in the country in rushing offense. And if you can make them one-dimensional, which would seem pretty easy, with Notre Dame's pass defense as good as it is now and the pass rush as good as it is now, I'm not saying that those are cupcakes or easy games, but I'm saying those are the two teams that I would want to play if I were Notre Dame in the first round. Oregon, strangely, was not a good matchup, but I don't know how inflated their numbers are by their non-conference schedule and the fact that some of the teams that they did play in the Big Ten, like Penn State, didn't turn out to be the big time teams that they are. Texas Tech, I can't figure out. They look unbelievably good on paper, but I don't know how good the Big 12 is collectively.
With the Bama thing, I completely agree. I read your article. Their passing attack's good, but it doesn't scare me as much as Ohio State. Ohio State's does, and then you can make them one-dimensional, and then let your secondary take over, kind of like you did against USC. But if Ohio State's receivers are out, you can kind of do the same thing against them. Yeah. Because while I'm sure Ohio State has 4 or 5 other receivers that would start 90% of the country, they're not Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. And while I was looking at some of their run game numbers, like it's good efficiency wise, but it's not great.
Yeah.
And some The total yards influenced by their passing attack is incredible, so they obviously pass more than they run. But the efficiency-wise, it's like 35th, I want to say. So it's not great.
Yeah,
Certainly not as
what
good
if
as it
they
was.
had to run?
Huh?
What if somebody really was very good as a pass defense and they had to run the ball? Last year, they didn't average a lot of rushing yards a game, but you looked at their yards per carry and you went, "Oh, that's a problem."
Right.
And then it was. This
Yeah,
team, I don't think, has the running backs that they had last year.
For sure. Their defense is another story, of course. Their defense is
Yeah.
insane in every way, shape, and form.
Yeah.
So Notre Dame will cross that bridge when it gets to it. But the offense certainly doesn't scare you as if the receivers aren't healthy.
Tyler, what did you think about Texas? What they said about Texas?
Fell on deaf ears. I didn't hear what they say about Texas. I don't even know where Texas is ranked. Let me check.
I think they're 17th.
They're 17th. The committee basically said you haven't looked good enough to make the playoff at 9-3.
Yeah, I mean, I have some friends who argue otherwise, but to me, it's, and now they've fallen into this. I don't know if it's a trap, but they've fallen down the path of we shouldn't. Of course, speaking from a Texas fan's perspective, this is what they're saying. We shouldn't have scheduled Ohio State because what if we schedule someone that we beat there and we're 10-2? Is that resume good enough to get in? And maybe it is. Like, you're the Oklahoma at that point, right? You even beat Oklahoma and you have that to show for it. But to me, it's like, don't lose to Florida, who had to fire their head coach, and you're in the playoff. Like that. That's what it comes down to for Texas.
I think them losing to Ohio State by 7 is better than some of the wins they could have had.
Yeah.
But they've just had, again, they were not competitive with Georgia. Had that been a closer game, that's maybe a different story.
Yeah. And this is assuming that maybe they can beat Texas A&M in the last game of the season, which that's a rivalry and we know how those go, but Texas A&M's a much better football team than Texas, and that's been a good thing for Notre Dame all year, hasn't it been? But this is the thing with that, to me, for Notre Dame losing that game. It was for a while. It felt like for a month there, maybe. We were intently watching Texas A&M's results to just make sure that Notre Dame's 1-point loss in a game which they botched an extra point stood up, and you were like, okay, we were right there if you're Notre Dame with one of the best teams in the country. I kind of dropped that after a month because has Notre Dame not shown you guys that they're also one of the best teams in the country just by what they've done alone, what Texas A&M has done withstanding? I mean, I go back to the comment that Reese Davis and Nick Saban made on College Game Day 2.5 weeks ago now. Notre Dame's a top 5 team in the country. And I was actually thinking about this today. Interested to hear y'all's thoughts. As we get closer to December and it's mid-November and the weather's getting colder, it feels to me like the same feelings are starting to come up about Notre Dame and maybe what they could do in this playoff. It feels a lot like last year to me. Like, I think Notre Dame is a legit player in this field.
It feels similar to me. But last year's team did not have a red flag as big as Notre Dame's short yardage struggles right now. And you can throw kicking in there too, because I don't think we were.
You definitely have to throw kicking in there as well.
So the two flaws, and like obviously the kicking was a struggle then, but it wasn't, both based on how we feel about it and how Marcus Freeman is talking about it. It wasn't as dire as it is now, and I keep watching them in short yardage and thinking that's probably going to bite them this year. So, but other than that, I think the vibes are very similar. It's just I don't think last year's team had a flaw that was as concerning as those.
Yeah, it was interesting. Jack and I were both talking to Marty Biaggi tonight about how they view that situation, and certainly Noah Burnett could be healthy by the playoff. And I don't think that solves everything, but I think it's somebody that is probably a little bit more reliable from 40 yards in if he's healthy. The short yardage thing's interesting too, because James Flanagan flashed in the Pitt game, and if they can get Cooper Flanagan healthy and able to play in the playoff, and they have both Flanagans, I think it gives them some formation flexibility that might help those short yardage situations. Maybe just James Flanagan is enough, but I think Jack made some really good points with that. But I do think this is a team that I would feel pretty good about going against most teams and having a fighting chance.
I think that's the big part right there is the defense has changed the narrative. I mean, the narrative has been established for a while now that they're good, but we're all old enough to remember when this Notre Dame defense was not good, and it was a legit worry that they wouldn't figure it out and the Irish would miss the playoff because of that. So far removed from that to the point of, to Eric's point, I feel very confident that Notre Dame gets into a game against anybody and remains in that game because it's able to play stingy enough defense. And maybe it's one of those games where the Irish are missing kicks or not getting the third and fourth downs and short that they need to. But the defense is good. Like you saw it 2 years ago against Ohio State when the Buckeyes came in here and there were a bunch of issues going on with that offense. And as it turned out, the Sam Hartman, Notre Dame, Jared Parker offense just wasn't it. But they were in that game because Notre Dame's identity is let's play tough, let's play physical, let's be in this football game. You hear Greg McElroy talk about the physicality of Notre Dame, all these other analysts, just like, yeah, I love the style. Jack, when you get into a game against, I'll throw this back up on the screen here. You get into a game against any of these teams, yeah, some of them might have more elite talent or what have you not on the offensive side of the ball that might scare you. But I think Notre Dame plays a pretty good football game against any of these logos that you're seeing on the screen this year, just by the way of what Notre Dame's shown us over the last month and a half.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I also don't think that there is a team like I'm not saying that like Indiana and Texas A&M and Ole Miss and Georgia aren't really good, but aside from a full strength Ohio State, there isn't a team that you really go against and you feel like they're giants. Like if you're Notre Dame, if you're Marcus Freeman, you're telling yourself that you can compete against a full strength of Ohio State too, obviously. But if you're a Notre Dame fan, there's no one that you go up against and you're not fully confident that Notre Dame has a good shot to win, in my opinion.
Well, when you look at it, it's like, let's take Ohio State out of it. And I know every season's different, but number 2, Indiana, you beat them last year. Number 3, Texas A&M, you lost by 1 point, and that thing could have easily gone differently. Georgia, number 4, you beat them last year. Texas Tech, to me, kind of has the feels of 2024 Indiana, where they're enjoying this thing for the first time, and they're going to go as far as it takes them. But, I mean, that's a really favorable draw to be number 5 and playing Tulane. But they seem like the darling that's probably not going to win this, and I think Notre Dame would love to line up and play against Texas Tech. Ole Miss is a little scary because if they do jump on you offensively, that can get out of hand on you. But Notre Dame has the type of defense to slow that down. Same thing with Oregon probably. So, Eric, do you agree with us? You go up and down the list and you see all these teams. It's like, and I know you did the ranking of who Notre Dame would want to play or not want to play.
Right.
I think the list of teams that Notre Dame can hang with what we're seeing right here is longer than the ones that they can't hang with.
I agree, especially if you add back in Gabe Rubio, you add back in Billy Schrauth, and maybe even get Charles Jagaza at some point in the playoff. That makes them even stronger. That's adding 3 really good players on the lines. Let me ask you guys a question that Tyler James asked me, and I can't believe I paused, but I did because this suddenly is a difficult question. If you go into this playoff game, let's just say you're blindly not looking at other teams' strengths and weaknesses. Who do you have more confidence in, the Notre Dame offense or the Notre Dame defense?
I'm not pausing. I'm just waiting for Jack to answer. I think this answer is going to surprise a lot of people.
At this point, I think it's the defense.
I think it's the defense too.
Because not only is the defense playing out of its mind right now, the short yardage thing, again, I think is a huge concern. And if you watch Notre Dame's run game in short yardage, you see how hard the edges are crashing, and you really miss Riley Leonard. Obviously, CJ Carr has done some incredible things with the passing game, but if you watch how hard the edges are crashing down on Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, and then you watch last year and you see the difference, you'll see what Riley Leonard did for that team's running game. And then Eric, you mentioned Billy Strouth and Charles Jagasaw being key players. They are huge because you look at some of the defensive tackles that Texas Tech and Oregon and Ole Miss and
Right.
Oklahoma have. And you look at some of Joe Otting's tape, and Joe Otting has done some really good things. Tyler and you and I talked about this on the board. He is really good at getting the angles and playing in space and getting up to the second level and cutting off linebackers. When you see Joe Otting go against a really big, strong defensive tackle, you start to get some concerns, and you start to get some concerns with Sullivan Absher, even though he's had some good reps on tape. Gerby Lambert has some really good reps on tape, but he's still a really young player. So you add Billy Strouth and Charles Jagasaw back to that equation, you start feeling a lot better, but you're not adding Ashton Craig. Pat Coogan's not walking through that door. And you obviously Charles Jagasaw's health is a massive question mark at best right now.
Okay, let me give you this hypothetical then. Let's say they get both Strouth and Jagasaw back. Who is your starting five?
You don't change the tackles. Knapp and Wagner are your tackles. I don't.
Correct.
I get it. Charles Jagasaw is maybe an NFL tackle, but he wasn't even working there when he was healthy in the spring, or getting to that point. Like, he was going to project as a guard this season, right?
Right, but remember last year he did it in basically a week and a half.
I just don't think you mess with, like, Anthony Knapp is playing so much better in mid-November than he was in September.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't talked about Emil Wagner, and he's never going to blow you away, but the fact that we're not talking about him, I think, is a good thing. It looked like he was on a path of regression. I think he turned that around. So I don't think you mess with the tackles. You've invested too much in Joe Otting to move off of him at center. Like, if you moved off of him, you'd technically be on a third option, and you don't want to do that.
So you're booting out the two guards?
Huh?
You're booting out the two guards then? You're booting out Gerby and Absher to put it in plug those two? I'm just curious.
I'm booting Absher out. Gerby has a case. He's played all year, but Charles Jagasaw is maybe your best offensive lineman. And, like, to have him healthy and not play him would probably irk a lot of people. I think Billy Strouth is better than both Lambert and Absher. So maybe you play Jagasaw at one of the guard spots and Strouth at the other.
Unequivocally, if Jagasaw and Strouth are healthy, they're playing. I don't think that's a question.
You play my guard?
So I have two questions. Number one, do you think about moving Knapp to guard and Jagasaw to tackle? I would argue no, because Knapp has, like you said, Knapp has been playing really well at tackle, and you still have some minor concern. Maybe not minor. You still have concerns about how he'll hold up in pass pro against better competition. But I think if you're Notre Dame, you've been pretty happy with what you've seen in pass pro throughout the season. The second question is, can Billy Strouth play center? Because I think your best five at that point are probably Knapp, Lambert, Wagner, Jagasaw, Strouth. But moving someone to center that late in the season and that late in their career, frankly, because I don't think Billy Strouth is coming back, it is a lot to ask of someone, especially in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
So I would probably agree with you that it's that you.
Eric, I want your answers to both of these, by the way. But if the offensive line is, because you didn't answer the offense-defense thing, but let's talk about the offensive line first.
I was doing my depth chart engineering while you guys were talking. I think Jagasaw has to play. If he's healthy and can play at the level he did against Penn State and Ohio State, he has to play. Now, where would I put him? I would put Strouth back in his spot. And then I'm probably going with a different center. I don't think Joe Otting is as good as those other guys. So who could be there? I would say it's either Absher or it would be Knapp. Knapp did, I don't know if you guys were you guys there for Joe Rudolph talking about that? Why
I was
Knapp
not.
was left. Okay.
So this is
so he was asked why, a lot of people don't see Knapp as a left tackle. Why is that? And what's your opinion of that? And he said, when he first came in, I was training him at center and guard. And we got to a point in August where I said, he's actually the best option for left tackle at this point. So it was almost a default move. Now, going into this year, there was a thought Knapp was going to be inside. But two things happened. Gerby Lambert got injured and had to have shoulder surgery in the spring, and they weren't sure when they were going to get him back. Otherwise, I do think Gerby would be a tackle and Knapp would be inside. That's what I took from Joe Rudolph's comments. So I think that he believes Knapp could play inside. Could he learn how to play center in 19 days or whatever? I don't know. I mean, that's the one thing about him is he's a quick learner. So if that is possible, I'm putting Knapp at center, Shrouth at left guard, and Jagaza at left tackle, and leaving that right side where they're comfortable with each other, Gerby and Emil.
I'm curious with the Gerby outside, Knapp inside scenario you were talking about. I have two questions. One, who's the odd man out if Jagasaw never gets hurt coming into fall camp? And two, what do you make then of Notre Dame going into spring ball with Knapp at tackle?
I don't know that. I don't think that they will. Just from talking to sources, they're feeling like this is a first world problem.
Yeah.
They're like, how do we keep Augustine and Black off the field next year? They are that high on those two, so those two are going to be competing. So if nobody transfers or goes pro, there's going to be a numbers issue. But going back to the Gerby Lambert thing, if Jagaza doesn't get hurt, I still think he's playing guard at that point. And I think then it would have been a competition of, can Gerby overtake Anthony Knapp? And he might have at some point. He would have trained at tackle, and then those two compete. And if Anthony was struggling earlier in the year, maybe they did go to Gerby at some point and get a 6'7", 330-pound guy instead of a 6'4", 305. Look, I love Anthony Knapp, and after talking to him, I can see why he's so good at what he does. I mean, the guy is just, if I had to hire him to be something at Blue and Gold, if he could do all the under the dome features for the magazine every week, I would hire him in a second. So I can see why he's really, really good, and I would never sell him short. But I do think that would have been a heck of a competition had Gerby tried to overtake him. And Will Black and Augustine are coming. And McHugh is a guy that is what, a 5-star? What is he, the number 11 player in the country? He wouldn't be ready next year, but I mean, he's going to be pushing. Their talent isn't a problem, but healthy bodies right now is what Notre Dame has to deal with, because if they don't get either a Shrouth or Jagaza back, and I don't think Shrouth is out for the playoff, but let's say he was, and they have another injury on the offensive line, I think that's a problem.
Jack, is the answer to this question from Antoine perhaps related to your worries about the short yardage situation? Do you think it's an offensive line issue, or do you think it's a schematic, like we know what Notre Dame's going to try to do here, and we're just going to get after it anyway? Like, could the offensive line be better in these short yardage situations?
Yes, I think it's part offensive line, part Carr's not a threat to keep it, and the edges are crashing way too hard. Part Notre Dame is in its own head at this point and doesn't really know what to do in this situation, and I don't think has a particularly good plan. Maybe that's a little too critical, but it's gone on long enough to the point where, like, if you were gonna figure something out, it probably should have happened by now. But I do think the core of the issue is that the interior offensive line, since Jagasaw and Shrouth and Craig, man, Craig was so good when he was playing, haven't been strong enough at the point of attack. And when your interior line hasn't gotten push in short yards, it's really hard to win with the run game.
Yeah, not running the ball on 4th and goal from the inch line or whatever it was. And I love targeting Eli Raridon there, but I put it out on social media. If you can't run the football in that situation, then you have a short yardage crisis. And Notre Dame has had a short yardage crisis all season. I will say, though, team that's won a lot of Super Bowls, and NFL to college might be apples to oranges situation, but Kansas City has not had a running game worth a crap pretty much every time that they get into the playoffs. And you'll see Andy Reid dial up some really interesting play concepts and whatnot on 4th and 3rd and short and whatever, and they throw for it. Or Mahomes ends up scrambling, which I think CJ Carr can do. Is it a situation where, like, Mike Denbrock's he's tried to get cute and it hasn't worked? Does he need to get even cuter? And it's like, all right, here we go. Or can Notre Dame just do the opposite and say smash mouth football time? Like, where's the answer? Is it on either end of the spectrum, or is it somewhere in the middle, Eric? Like, it's been maddening for a lot of people all year.
I think the plan that Notre Dame had was they thought they would get Cooper Flanagan back, and they thought James Flanagan, once he was in the oven for a while, would be pretty good. And half of that is kind of happening, and the other half didn't. And I think Mike Denbrock, with his relationship through recruiting with Ty Washington, probably reached on a guy that isn't going to be a conventional tight end for you. And I think that takes some of the options away from what Notre Dame can do. Not that that's the only thing that they can do, but when you have two really good blocking tight ends, really physical tight ends, it does help give you options and makes you less predictable. And then even if you are predictable, those are pretty good guys blocking.
The Cooper Flanagan thing is an issue. Like, I see him walking around after games, before games and whatnot, but it is really weird that Notre Dame brought him back. He played 4 reps and then clearly aggravated something with that Achilles, and we haven't seen him since. Not maybe weird's not the right word, but a little disheartening, because that clearly wasn't the plan. That was supposed to be the ramp-up game, and that was a month ago, and we haven't seen him play in a game since.
He came back in an incredibly fast timeline. Now, again, I'm not a doctor, and I didn't look at his MRIs or anything like that, but I mean, just from the Achilles injuries that I've covered in my career, I've never seen somebody come back that fast. Now, again, he plays a different position like Sean Crawford, and it was Jadarian Price. But that was really, really quick. That was very ambitious. I didn't think he'd be back until maybe the playoff, if then. And maybe that's the way it's going to work out.
That was the Sugar Bowl when he went down, right?
Correct. It was a Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, that's January 2nd. I remember thinking the same thing, Eric. I'm like, well, it's going to be a calendar year until we see him again. So hopefully Notre Dame's in the same exact spot playing deep into January. And then October 18th, USC. That is a crazy timeline.
I will say, as much as there's just one comment, throw the fade of the goal line. As much as the goal line fade is one of the more inefficient plays in football, when you're Notre Dame and you're struggling this much in short yardage and you have Malachi Fields, that might be something you try a little bit more.
Super fun guy to talk to, by the way. I think both of y'all talked to Marty Biazzi tonight, but Malachi Fields was holding court with some of us on the other end, Tyler James included, and we had a good conversation with him talking about that catch, talking about Jeremiah Love's spin move, which, by the way, he practices meticulously, and in practice, like, it's not just God-given with that guy. Like, he is the real deal in terms of work ethic and whatnot. And I saw a social media post. This is probably the last time that we get to see him play at Notre Dame Stadium, unless this changes, guys, unless Notre Dame gets a 8 or better next to its name.
Yeah.
Jeremiah Love playing at Notre Dame Stadium for the last time, probably on Saturday.
Boy, I didn't even think of that. They should let him run out and get roses and hug his parents on senior day.
I have seen programs do that. I have seen programs do that for what it's worth. I know, not to make it about my alma mater, but I've seen Missouri do that with Luther Burden and then Nick Bolton back in the day.
Getting back to the fade, I like Malachi Fields on that. You know who I think Notre Dame likes on it, and he's not playing right now, is Jaden Greathouse, because he's so physical in that tight space in the end zone with a nickel. A lot of nickels just can't measure up to his muscle and so forth. I think Jaden Greathouse would be really good on those too.
The last time we saw him, I can't get this out of my head. He made that spectacular catch on the sideline at Arkansas. And for all of Will Pauling's greatness, and he's been a tremendous add for Notre Dame offensively from the portal, there are things that Greathouse does, to your point, Eric, that Pauling can't do, and really nobody else on the Notre Dame roster can do. And I guess that gets back to what you were saying about Gabriel Rubio, Billy Strouth. Like, these are going to be, you know how NFL teams make the late the deadline ad for trades and whatnot. Those guys will feel like that if Notre Dame makes the playoff and they're able to play. It's like, here comes the cavalry type situation. And it all adds up to me saying what I said earlier, that I like Notre Dame going into this thing, assuming that it makes the playoff. But the one thing that will be different, assuming that it holds the way that it is right now, very curious to see how Notre Dame holds up on the road, because when they were hosting Indiana last year, guys, I don't know if you felt the same way, but I had basically Sharpied Notre Dame in to play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And yeah, we covered that Indiana game, but it went exactly how I expected it to go. This year, all bets off type situation. You got a redshirt freshman quarterback, and you might have to play on the road. Like, I'm not sure how that would go.
Well, I think it's definitely an advantage to play at home, especially against some of the teams that are in that grouping. But when you asked me the offense-defensive question, which I've avoided twice, I'll tell you what my answer ended up being after a long pause. It was the offense, but barely. I really wanted to say the defense, and I probably should have said the defense. I think you guys had better answers than me. But I have so much confidence in what CJ Carr can do at the line of scrimmage against elite defenses. The Pitt game really sold me. I know a lot of people, well, he had 2 interceptions and stuff. And what Marcus said was kind of matched up with what I thought was going on at the game, in that he was sliding protections and he was checking out of bad plays. And Pitt's not a great team, but they have great linebackers and they have a really good front seven. And the things that he was doing to put Notre Dame in good positions against a front seven that's going to be similar to some of the teams they might see in the playoff impressed me. And so, but getting back to the short yardage thing, boy, if you could just put CJ Carr in Riley Leonard's body, that would be the optimum. Maybe they can have Blake Hebert run that play or something.
Hey, Jack, to that end, I might finally be on board with the Minchie package or the Tyler Buckner package or whatever, because you've tried so many other things to this point. Why not try that? And why not unleash it this late in the season where teams don't really have the tape on it, and it could be a thing. I've come around on that.
What I was told in the summer is, and they've never used it, there is a Kenny Minchie package. I don't know that it's short yardage, but there is a Kenny Minchie package. I thought we might see it in the Miami
against
game.
Navy on that one play where he got the first down. Like,
yeah,
it almost reminded you, as good as CJ Carr is, when Kenny Minchie did that in the Navy game, I was like, oh, this is what the Notre Dame offense would have been had Kenny Minchie won that really, really close offseason battle.
Speaking of Kenny Minchie, Eric, you mentioned CJ Carr's ability to make checks to the line of scrimmage. You see that on tape from him all the time, at least once or twice every game. Notre Dame makes a big play after an obvious check from Carr. You saw that a couple times with Minchie in development time in the Navy game. There was the Aeneas Williams touchdown was a check. The play that should have been a touchdown, it was remember the CJ had a check to Jeremiah Love on that angle route or Texas route beginning of the game. The play that Jabron Payne dropped, I think it was the last play before kneel downs, was a very similar check against a very similar blitz package from Navy. Just more proof that like Kenny Minchie is going to be a good starting quarterback for someone, and that that competition in camp was legitimately close.
It was real. The surge was real, and what you just spoke to is where he made up ground late. It was that being able to process things at the line of scrimmage, because we all knew that he could run, and we all knew that he had an arm talent. And when you would see Kenny Minchie before, it was like great play, great play, great play. Ugh. And being able to be better at the line of scrimmage kept him away from the ugh plays. And I think you're right. I mean, had CJ Carr been abducted by aliens, I don't like to predict anybody gets hurt. I think Kenny Minchie would have done a really good job this year.
And CJ Carr would have done a really good job on whatever planet they would have played football where those aliens would have taken him. And I think that's the point where
they were like, we're not giving him back.
Yeah. We've talked all we need to about Notre Dame.
Eric, it always makes me laugh.
What was that, Jack?
I said I always like when Eric uses that metaphor because it's probably like the third or fourth time I've heard him say that, and it always makes me laugh.
This one was really good, and it was also a signaling of our signing off here. Because, again, I think we've talked all we need to about Notre Dame and obviously where Notre Dame appears in this college football playoff bracket. And I always say at the beginning, I'm like, don't take any stock in this because it's going to look a lot different. But as we get closer, guys, you're starting to see the way that this is shaping up. And maybe, just maybe, Notre Dame does go on the road to play Oklahoma, which would bring back a lot of 2012 memories for a lot of people. And I know Eric's shaking his head.
That's amazing.
Tyler James was talking about that game with us on the ride back from Pittsburgh. And I always said I'd never go to a game at Oklahoma, but if it's the college football playoff and it's Notre Dame and the Sooners, like, sign me up.
Can I claim the historical look back feature on that? I know that might be counterintuitive because Eric and Tyler covered that game, but
you can interview Eric and Tyler for
look back. Yeah, that's a great point.
We'll see if that happens. Again, it's shaping up for Notre Dame to win these last two games and get in there. But as Eric said at the very beginning of all this, the chaos over the next 3 weeks is definitely going to be worth monitoring because it will sort of be the telltale of where Notre Dame ends up in that bracket. So can't wait for that, guys. In the meantime, really appreciated you guys hopping on here, talking about the rankings, talking about Notre Dame. Give a thumbs up on this video, like, subscribe, all that good stuff helps us out for when we talk about all this stuff the next time, which will be a week from tonight, and then also a lot of videos in the meantime. So for Eric and Jack, I'm Tyler, and we will see you guys next time.